We exist in a community in an industry that suffers from a pretty severe diversity problem right now. Our job is to tell the stories of people from all over the world, and when the chief storytellers right now continue to remain men, that's a problem. That's something that we really need to think about and look at. And it's dangerous, because if our job is to tell the general public about people they'll never meet and places they'll never see, we lend them our eyes. We lend them our ways of seeing. And we need to make sure that those ways of seeing are coming from a diverse group of people, and that's across all spectrums. I happen to be looking at gender and thinking about gender, but that also touches on religion and sexuality and race and socioeconomic status. And those are not, we have this special field that manages to have a completely global spread. You can talk about diversity issues in America, in Europe, but it's hard when you're trying to reflect a global community. The journalism community is truly global. We are pulling people from around the world to document issues from around the world. And so we need to make sure that the people in charge are truly representing the global population. We now have 3 years of data from the World Press State of News Photography report, and consistently over the course of the past 3 years, we've seen this same number that 15% of respondents are women. And that's horrifically low. I think you can argue that statistic may not necessarily totally reflect the actual number of women in the industry, but it's still telling. It's still meaningful. And so sometime last year, I began to try to have conversations with editors about why this was still happening. Why in the 21st century, when the women's suffragette movement was a very long time ago, why we're still struggling so hard to achieve gender parity in this particular field. And I think there are a lot of systemic reasons for why this continues, and some of them are not unique to the journalism world or the photojournalism world. Some of them are just societal, and we have to look at them from that wider perspective as well. But the most basic thing to start thinking about when I was trying to figure out how we can begin a conversation is, well, when an editor picks up a phone and calls an independent freelance photographer, what affects those decisions? Who are they calling and why? And so many editors I spoke to told me that they didn't really know that many female photographers. They didn't know where to find them. They didn't know where to find a female photographer based in Afghanistan. They didn't know where to find a female photographer who liked to shoot science stories. And in my opinion, that's a convenient excuse. That was something that I was told to get me to shut up and go away, basically, because I've become a thorn in the side of a lot of people in this industry. But regardless, I wanted to come up with a way. I'm sorry, I haven't been using this clicker at all. Wow. It should just be on the slide for indefinitely. I wanted to come up with a way to at least be able to respond the next time I had an editor tell me, I don't know where to find women. I don't know where to find female photographers. I wanted to be able to have a list to say, here, I made something for you. If you can't find them, they're here. I know plenty of women who are based in Afghanistan. I know plenty of women who shoot science stories. There are a ton of us, and we're very talented. And so starting last July, I made a Google form and forwarded it to about 20 friends and asked them to forward it to some of their friends. I would just ask, if anyone takes a photo of that, this information is completely fine for anyone in this theater to look at, but please don't post this online, because bad things happen when you post the phone numbers and email addresses of a group of women on the internet. I sent it around to 20 people, starting in July after a few particularly frustrating conversations at some of the summer photo festivals. And by December, I had a list of 400 people based around the world from a pretty diverse set of backgrounds. So the spreadsheet contains information about base, contact information, whether or not each of these women has gone through hostile environment training, whether they own protective equipment, languages they speak, geographic areas of expertise, their regular editorial clients, anything that an editor or a commissioning organization might need to know. And if anyone in this room would like access, this is a private document, because as I mentioned, it's a complicated thing to share personal information for women on the internet. If you are not aware, female journalists are often targeted in really insidious ways online. So this is privately available to any editor or anyone here who would like to reach out to me. All you have to do is access the contact page on this website. But as a second step, on February 1st, I launched womenphotograph.com, which is a online database, much more pared down information, but is available as a resource and a directory for people to look through what is now 557 women based around the world in 87 countries, I believe. There are additional resources. There's a list of festivals, grants, resources for young and emerging photographers. Everyone on the Women Photograph list has 5 or more years of experience in the industry, needed to have some sort of defining cutoff and decided on 5 years. And I'm happy to say now that more than 200 photo editors have asked for access to this document. 8 newspapers in the United States have distributed the list to their entire photo desks. So it's small change, but it is change. It is growing consciousness. And if all this accomplishes on my end is that at least editors think a little more when they pick up the phone about who they're calling and why, that is meaningful to me. That's important. The list is expanding constantly. You can see this is the distribution of where the 557 photographers live. I'm trying to be very conscious of the fact, I'm gonna pick this up, sorry. Trying to be very mindful of the fact that we need to be inclusive of local photographers in Latin America, Africa, the Middle East, and Asia, not just Western photographers based abroad. It's another huge issue with diversity in our industry. So as you can see, Africa is still not as well covered as I'd like. So if anyone here knows female photographers in Tunisia or Malawi or Niger, please get in touch, or Greenland. And for me, this is step one. This is the first of what I hope will become a long-lasting attempt to elevate the voices of female and non-binary photographers in this industry. Last month, I launched a series of grants totaling more than $12,000 for both established and emerging photographers. I think when we talk about the problems and the roots of diversity in this industry, when it comes to gender, you look at photojournalism programs, you look at students studying photography, and those classrooms are more than 50% female. And then you look at 25-year-old working photojournalists in the field, and all of a sudden the women have disappeared. So even though this list is really meant to provide a group of established working female photojournalists, I'm also deeply concerned with how do we cultivate, nurture, mentor photographers who, before they reach that 5-year point, because that's often the place where they're dropping out. That's the place where they're disappearing. So next month we'll be announcing a mentorship program. It's going to be structured somewhat similar to the Eddie Adams workshop, for those of you who are familiar. So it'll be several groups of emerging photographers will be paired with a photo editor and an established photographer mentor. And it'll be a structured year-long program where they'll have commitments to meet with each other. And then hopefully shortly after that, my goal is to create a travel fund for photographers from non-Western countries. Because again, when we talk about increasing diversity in this industry, those of us who grew up in the West have a huge advantage when it comes to reaching editors and publications that are largely in control of the news media. And if you are based in Ethiopia or Vietnam, your ability to get to places like Amsterdam or Visa pour l'Image or the New York Times Portfolio Review or the Eddie Adams Workshop, and we all know those are the events that can make our careers. If you can't get to those events, if you can't afford to get to those events, you may not ever get that first break. So I'm currently in the process of trying to find funding for that, so if there are any kind funders in the audience, also please get in touch. I've also been collecting data over the course of this year because it's hard to have these conversations without real numbers. It's easy for me to complain, and it's easy for me to get irritated with hiring practices, but we also need to see solid evidence. And so I've got a group of 12 researchers who are helping me look at a lot of different statistics over the course of this year, and I'll just share one very small portion of that. But looking at the lead front page photo in these 6 newspapers from January 1st to March 31st, this is the percentage of those images that were taken by women. And this is really bad. It's perfectly in line with the 15% World Press statistic, and if we look at the winners of this year's contest, of the 46 photographers who've been recognized, 5 of them are women. So we have a long way to go. We have a lot that we need to do. We have a lot of different things we need to think about within this industry. And I would just say to people who haven't thought about this before, for people for whom this is not a priority, I'm lucky. I've been working in the industry for 10 years. I now work almost entirely based on grant funding. I don't need editors. I can afford to piss off the New York Times or anyone else that I'm calling out by name. But that's not true for most independent photographers. You know, our hireability is often linked to how much we're liked, and the person getting up on a soapbox is often not very likable. And so I come from a position of privilege in that respect, and so I'm happy to be the complainer. But if you think that this is not a problem because you have not heard women complaining about the sexism that they deal with in the industry, it's not because it doesn't exist. It's because you haven't heard about it. Ask any of your female photojournalist friends what they have gone through, and I guarantee that every single one of them will have a story for you. We all have our own stories. And we need to figure out how to create more institutional support, because when you don't have the benefit of corporate structure, when you don't have the benefit of an HR office, not that workplace situations are ideal even when those exist, but it's even worse when you exist as a freelancer in a bubble and you have no one to go to. So I'm going to end my rant there, and I think Lars and I are going to have a little conversation, but thank you very much. And while we're talking, I'm just going to flip through some of the ladies in the group.
Daniella, thank you so much. And I would like to invite the General Director of World Press here, Lars Boering. Please join in the conversation. I'll give you... I think we need an extra mic to give the man a voice too. Lars, why did you think it was so important to have this issue here on the festival? Because it's a bit different than the other lectures. Most other lectures are prize winners or people we invited because they say something about their work in photography. Why did you find it important to include this topic?
I called Danielle a couple of weeks ago, because I've been looking at the initiative, and I can see the source. That's because we have opened up on these percentages of the participants of World Press Photo Contest, and I think it's ridiculous. And every year it turns out to be the same thing. So to have this conversation is one thing, but I also like her for taking real action. And just as we, together with Everyday Africa, started the African Journalist Database, she came up with this initiative. And for me, it's necessary as a platform to support this. Not to interfere, but to support it, because I feel the danger of a one-woman machine to run out of steam, because it is a world that resists these things, it seems, if you look at these numbers.
I have a lot of steam, though.
Am I on your team?
No, I said I have a lot of steam.
Oh, you have a lot of steam. You have the steam, I'm on your team. No, so it's sort of, yeah, that's for me. Let's support this. We World Press Photo is more than a contest. It's a platform, and then we can take these affirmative actions as well.
What do you do? What what actions do you take? What do you do to change this?
Well, I think we can add. Doing this. This is why I added it to this festival, because it should also function as a place where lots of people from the industry come together and see that it is talked about and presented. But I also look for ways to support the initiatives. So I'll put some money in your travel fund.
Thank you.
Well, that's a start. If it's
for the last couple of months, last year when we were at Look 3, we invited photographers from Africa. So we're already doing this, but it's not something that you wave a flag of, but it's part of what we do. So to add to this, we also invited Chapiso to come to Amsterdam. So it's doable, and if we have the resources, then we can do this. So yeah.
Daniella, he talked about resistance in the photo community against women and against gender equality. What is that resistance, do you think?
I don't know if I would call it resistance necessarily. I don't think there is anyone who presented with a equally talented woman would come up with a real argument for why not to hire her. But getting to that point of recognizing why it's important to make sure there's gender equality is somehow not yet a given. And like I said, this is not about affirmative action. This is not about gender equality in hiring practices. This is about making sure that we're doing good journalism, because we cannot look at the world through the eyes of men only. We cannot look at war just through the male gaze. We cannot look at fashion just through the male gaze. We cannot look at sports just through the male gaze. We can't look at politics, anything. When you look at the White House Photographers Press Corps in DC, and you often see 50 photographers, every single one of whom is a man, that's dangerous. That's a problem. And again, this is not something that's unique to photojournalism, but when the knock-on effects of what we do reaches so many people and influences how they think about other people and other issues, it does make it more poignant, more impactful.
Thank you, Daniella, and thank you, Lars.
You're welcome.